Veritas Aquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 41, God's Pain. Let me go! Naruto snarled as he tried to pull himself out from under the dozen people that had piled atop him to keep him from leaving the mountain. He had stumbled across Kakashi's broadcast, and while he was almost finished with his training, he felt that it was enough to help him with the effort. Not to mention, it was a mandated article of the village, and he was bent as hell. He was bent as all hell to follow through on his oath given priority to graduation. Fukusaku, however, disagreed. Keep a tight hold on him, the old sage said from where he was on the blonde's back. Shima will be back with the beads of guilt momentarily. Tiger, if what the commander said is true, then you've got to finish the training. Leon, who was among the lower parts of the pile-up and had been the first to successfully catch the running sage in training with a tried and true tackle, said through gritted teeth. Her grip around his waist tightened when he began to wiggle through, which caused her cheek to press firmly against his, and not the whiskered one on his face. Geez, Tiger, you really don't want to make this easy, do you? Almost slipped out of my grasp there. The lass is right, dumbass, Roshi, who had returned a few days after Naruto and Leon met, and grit out. He was the second to last to jump on the blonde, using his semblance to create a large, deep trench that the boy merely leapt over before Leon tackled him to the ground. Think of what you're doing, fool! You won't be able to get through his skull, Roshi, Fukusaku grumbled from where he sat on the young sage in training's back. He's his mother's son. If her ass was anywhere as tight as Tiger's, I'd believe it, Leon commented nonchalantly. She felt a few of the other members of the pile look in her direction. What? Tight asses are signs of stubborn mules, aren't they? Not going to dignify that with a response, lass, Roshi sighed. He grinned tightly. Though, if you want to show me yours later, not interested, Leon flatly denied as the shifting body above her shoved her face awkwardly into Naruto's lower back. Hey, stop moving or he'll get out. Worth a shot, Roshi muttered. He looked up and smirked. Speaking of, Ma, pleased to see you again. Naruto strained his neck, trying to see where the presumed knocked out blow would come from, but this was ultimately his undoing as several darts shot into the other side. His glowing eyes dimmed and rolled into his skull, and he passed out without another word. His face dropped right into the dirt. The dozen bodies waited for a minute before they slowly broke away from the blonde they had to subdue. Well, except for one. Okay, this is seriously the firmest ass I've ever felt. What kind of lunges does he do? Leon mused as she actually groped the unconscious boy's rear. Her left lion-like ear was pinched tightly between her two fingers before Shima pulled her off of Naruto. Ow, 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 ow! That's no way for a girl your age to act in public. Why, when I was your age, we had the tendency to wait for others to be out of sight. Shima scolded the bucksman in fondness on proper public etiquette and dragged her away while Fusaku helped Naruto's unconscious form over his shoulder. The older sage sighed and followed his wife, all the while wondering how to convince Naruto that he had to finish his training, especially if the horde was caused by who he presumed it to be caused by. Roshi, Fukusaku glanced at the friend of his deceased student and pursed his lips. Go to Khan and warn them. The commander must know what it is that's coming for him. And what is coming for him? Roshi asked. Fukusaku's eyes narrowed and his free hand tightened around his cane as he turned and carried his unconscious student back to the sacred oil baths. Pain. What do you mean we can't go? Yang glared at Professor Port and Dr. Ublik, who blocked her team and several others that were itching to rush off to their ships and help Khan with the grim attack. Well, the two teachers had a good dozen of Elysian drones backing them, but it was primarily the two teachers that held the students back. Commander Hatake has good reason to deny the assistance of others, though even I find it a foolish one, Port said gruffly. I'm sorry, students, but Professor Osman has sided with the leader of Khan and the order of the council. Screw the council, someone in the back shouted. We should be allowed to go help, another added, while more voices spoke out in protest. I'm not even a student here, or Atlas. Why should I listen to you? Sun asked heatedly as he stepped forward. Ublik turned to him and adjusted his glasses. Yes, but you're not a graduate of Khan Academy either, Mr. Wukong, was it? Ublik folded his hands behind his back when Sun scowled. Admittedly, though, it may be that all of you wish to rush off and assist your friends or the innocent in defending Khan. To do so would break the vital treaty or risk war. That's such bullshit, Yang snapped. She pointed beyond the teachers and drones at some of the other students who had managed to board bullheads that were set to go to con. The buxom blonde's red eyes light lingered on a girl with short brow hair pulled into twin buns that followed a boy with eyebrows that made Yang feel uneasy. She gestured at them and the others that followed them. Why do they get to go? Those are proven graduates of Khan, as are the transport pilots that are flying them. They alone know the codes that will grant them entry into Khan's airspace that has been deemed restricted. Ublik was calm as ever as he addressed the horde of battle-hungry students. He took a sip from his cup before he continued. If I will not ask you all again, please return to your dorms and wait for further instructions, or, if you'd so wish, you could retreat to the main hall. I believe a live feed of the siege is being prepared by some Elysian students in the event that drastic measures need be taken. Hearing this caused many of the students to rush off to the hall without another word, and Yang would have stayed to protest further if Ruby didn't grab her arm and pull her along. Come on, Yang, we can try calling Dad again, or maybe Uncle Crow, Ruby said softly. I don't want to call Dad or Crow, Ruby. Yang's scowl fell into a forward frown, and she hugged her arms around herself. I want to help. Yang, Blake said, putting a hand on her partner and friend's shoulder. Naruto will be fine. He's got Haku, Sasuke, and Kurama and his other friends in Kon to watch his back. Not to mention his impeccable abilities to survive because of his idiotic invincibility. White said from Ruby's other side. She had a small look of annoyance on her face. I don't understand, though. Why would they refuse Alice's help? Our military is the strongest. That's precisely why. The girls of Team Ruby looked up to see the mint green-haired minstrel girl approaching them. Emerald stopped a good distance from them, her arms crossed and her face stony rather than the coy smirk she usually wore. Con is the first defense of Vacuo, and if it falls, Vacuo will follow. Occupation by an outside force, for protection or otherwise, will be seen as a weakness. And just how do you know that? Wise asked. Naruto told me a lot of things when we were together, Emerald said. Her eyes were locked with Yang's, both not glaring, but not being friendly with each other as they did. It must have been nice, using him to get information, then tossing him out the door, Yang said as her eyes narrowed and Emerald's followed suit. The rest of Team Ruby felt tense. Yang and Emerald hadn't been this close to each other in a long time, mostly because the latter would keep away whenever a single member of Team Nox, regardless of who it was nearby. Likewise, Yang was usually distracted or occupied by the leader of Team Nox, so thoughts of confronting her boyfriend's ex had slowly dwindled away, until now. You say that like you know what happened, Emerald said sharply. I do know what happened, Yang growled as her fists tightened to whiten her knuckles beneath her gloves. You think he'd keep something like that from me? Willingly? Yes, Emerald nodded. Are you saying I forced him to tell me? Yang challenged. I wouldn't use the word force, Emerald said. She smirked suddenly. But it wouldn't surprise me if you had to work to get anything out of him. Emerald, the sudden shot stopped the red-eyed Yang's fist-powered retort before it could be thrown. Team Ruby and Emerald looked over to see Mercury and Cinder approaching, their shoulders tensed and eyes narrowed. Cinder gave the mint-haired girl a stern glare before she faced Team Ruby with an apologetic smile. I'm sorry if she bothered you, but the whole situation has all of us on edge. Cinder looked back at the cringing girl with another glare. And now isn't the time to start anything from nothing. Sorry, Cinder, Emerald murmured. Cinder arched a brow and folded her arms. I don't believe I'm the one that you should be apologizing to. Emerald's outraged scowl caused Mercury to bite back a chuckle, making a terrible effort of hiding his amusement behind a cough into his fist. Team Ruby, Blake in particular, watched the exchange curiously. The stance and mannerism seemed off, for Mercury and Cinder anyway. They were trying to act tense, whereas Emerald really was. Yes, you're right, Cinder. Yang, I'm sorry. Emerald grit out before she whirled around on the balls of her feet and walked away with the amused Mercury following her. Cinder looked back at the other girls, Ruby specifically. Again, I'm sorry about all this. All of us are a little on edge, Cinder said with a small smile. She turned and walked off after her team, looking over her shoulder and waving a farewell. There, see? All's forgiven, Ruby said with a pat on her sister's arm and a wide smile on her face. Yang huffed and crossed her arms while her eyes went back to their normal shade of lilac. Yeah, but I wish you'd had just let me hit her. That wouldn't have solved anything, Weiss admonished the girl. Yang shrugged. I would have felt better. and possibly got us kicked from the tournament, Blake said dryly. She then frowned. If there even is a tournament. The mood became rather somber after after that comment, and they made their way to the main hall. Pyrrha waved them over to a spot where they could see the screen, and near her, along with the rest of her team, were Team Sun and Coffee. Fox had a comforting hand on Coco's shoulder while her foot was tapping furiously. Velvet was in the midst of a hushed conversation with Yatsuhashi. Likewise, Sun and Neptune were softly bickering over the flaw in Sun's plan to apprehend a bulkhead, and John had just initiated conversation with Scarlet as Team Ruby made their way to the small section. So the problem isn't so much stealing the bulkhead as it is getting the codes to prevent us from being shot down? John asked. Scarlet nodded. The codes don't exist digitally. From what we overheard, each graduate of Conan has to memorize a code upon graduation in case this sort of thing happened, the red-haired boy said. He opened his mouth to say more, but quieted when Sage nudged him and pointed at the stage. All right, the micro drones are there. The Legion technician smiled and gave a thumbs up to the students. We're all set. The screen flickered for a moment before an image cut in. Smoke and debris filled the canvas as Grim by the hundreds broke through a wall. The audio was weak, so not much could be heard, but there was a clear picture granted by the CCT's relay. A large group of creeps bound towards the camera, but suddenly stopped and fell forward, their heads pierced by several shots. The microdrone turned and focused on the one who did the deed, finding a rifle bearing Kurma in torn clothes, staring back, his glasses absent from his face, and tears along his clothes. Around them, Blake noticed that many were asking the same question that was on their mind. How long has Kurma been fighting? There's just no fucking end to them, Kurma said under his breath as he used Rikudo to shoot down more Grim. He quickly twisted the rifle in his hand and it shifted into a spear. He used the pole arm to propel himself up and over a barnacle when it charged at him, and while in the air, shifted Rikudo back to its rifle mode. Say ah, Kurma said when the gorilla-like Grim turned around to roar at him. He pulled the trigger and a single shot tore through the back of the Grim's head. The Fox Faunus landed atop a partially collapsed building in a crouch, while the Barangol fell from where it stood. He jumped up again and when another Barangol leaped up at him and smashed through the rest of the building. Give me 5 minutes to catch my breath, damn it! Kurma snarled when he landed. He shifted Rikudo back to its spear form once again and stabbed the Grim through its throat. The Fox Faunus pulled his spear back and took a few heavy breaths. 3 thuds made him look up and whimper as 3 geists, or Petrogigas, as the Grim were called when they were fully protected by various forms of debris. Now that's just not fair, Kurma said as he fell to a knee. One of the guys moved forward and lifted its boulder-sized arm, intent on bringing it down onto him. Kurma gritted his teeth, pushed himself up to dive out of the way, only just avoiding being crushed. The force of the blast still sent him flying back first into a wall. The wall in question gave way, and the ceiling it held up came down on the Faunus, or rather, it would have if a red vortex hadn't opened up beneath Kurma and dumped him onto a rooftop nearby. Didn't think you'd be so quick to give up. The voice made Kurma glance up and scowl at his savior. Obito had a cheeky grin on his face before he looked at the geists. He pursed his lips and hummed. Well, that hardly seems fair. That's what I said, Kurma groaned as he got back to his feet. He flicked his wrist and Rikudo shifted back to its initial bladed monk staff form. He held the staff out towards the Grim, and the ring opened with a small black orb growing in the center. Just say the word and there'll be rubble, along with most of the square and any potential survivors, Obito said as he pushed the Faunus' weapon down. He lifted his false right arm and his hand folded in, replaced by a cylindrical edge. A conical edge shot out from the center of the arm, gleaming almost maliciously in the overhead sunlight. He grinned at Kurma before he looked back at the geists. I got these, bozos. Go find your teammates. Yeah, okay. Kurma nodded. He shifted Rikudo back to a spear before he ran to the edge of the roof and jumped to the next rooftop. Instead on doing as he was told, Obito cracked his neck and pulled his spear arm back. He shifted his footing and held his only hand out. With a battle cry, he threw his right arm forwards, and the edge fired like a harpoon. A long link of spiked chains connecting the weapon to the arm. It pierced through the hard rock of one guy completely. As the debris fell, Obito reeled himself towards the spear. He used the momentum to drive both of his feet through the Grimm's exposed masks. The guy's body crumbled apart, and Obito pulled his arm free of the boulder. It was lodged it was lodged in once. The rock crashed to the ground. As wisps of black rose up around him, Obito faced the other two Petrogigas. He dug around in a pouch set at the left side of his hips and pulled out two red crystals. All right, let's see how well you made that armor, he taunted before he tossed the fire dust into his mouth and crushed down. Obito's chest swelled, and he pointed at the left Gigas with two fingers. A blaze of fire shot from his lips, engulfing one of the two Gigas fully and slowly melting away the armor. While the Grims feebly attempted to extinguish its new problem, Obito smirked and exchanged two dark clouds of smoke through his nostrils. The Gigas' body fell apart. The geist within burned to nothing, and Obito faced down the last of the trio. Two down, he brandished his spear arm and pulled out three more red crystals. The Gigas faced him fully and roared. Obito grinned, his coal-colored eyes now a bright scarlet. One to go. Six pairs of ringed purple eyes stared down at the chaos that ranged around the and within Khan. The cloaked and pierced bodies of pain covered over the village. Khan, loyal to the last, floated beside the diva path, paper wings keeping her aloft. They are doing better than we expected, she said. The ringed eyes didn't so much as blink. In that regard, the mortal path began. We should intervene, the grim path said. These blasphemers must be punished, the predator path said. They must be made examples of, the sure path said firmly. The time has come for them to learn their place, the Naraka path finished. The paths moved back, leaving the Diva path alone with Conan. The Diva path held his hands out towards the city village. His eyes remained impassive as he stared down at the stronghold that defended Vacuo. The best of the best certainly came from Khan, evidenced by his teacher's skill, and further displayed by the surprising amount of survivors that withstood the grim siege. Had he not been so certain of their disobedience towards his vision, he would have spared them. That said, however, it is time they learned Conan. The Diva path felt his aura build up in his palm, felt the air become heavy around him, threatening to crush his very being. It is time they learned of pain. The Diva path released his built-up aura in a furious blast, while beside him Conan said only three words as she watched the city of Kon implode as a massive crater filled the center of the square and expand out as a fraction of the few hundreds who defended Conan were crushed to death by the debris that was forced to the edge of the mighty wall of her god's wrath. Only three words escaped her lips. Divine judgment, my lord. Pain said nothing and took in his destruction. The city was gone. The many creatures of Grimm that managed to pass the walls were dead, as were many of those that defied him. However, there were bound to be stragglers, fools who would cling to this pain and use it as fuel to stoke the flames of war. Pain narrowed his eyes. Come, he said simply as he descended towards the crater. Conan and his paths, who were suspended by his will in the first place, so they had little choice in the matter, followed him down. Pain touched down in the epicenter of his display of power. His path landed behind him, all ready to move at his word, at his thoughts. Far away from this devastation, a seventh figure hidden in shadow opened his purple ringed eyes slightly. His hand, weak and frail in appearance, curled into a tight fist. He spoke at the same time as the path. We end the will of fire today. End of chapter 40.